Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll start where Mr. Sankar left off and ask a question, and either, all three of you feel free to chime in. I also serve on the Commerce Committee, and to my surprise, in my first year, I was named the ranking member of the Space and Science Subcommittee. I would not have put that on my bingo card in coming into the Senate in my first 2 years, but I found it fascinating because of the innovation that's happening in space, driven by the commercial private sector, right? One of the things that we were able to do was to extend the learning period, which is kind of essentially allowing these companies to innovate, and any regulations that would come really sort of follow the path of what has worked. So not to artificially constrain the innovation on the front end with a bunch of bureaucrats who are just sort of making it up, not really knowing where the, what the rules of the road really should be. I'm wondering, is there a scenario, or how would we construct something similar? I mean, we're all getting at this challenge of innovation, and how do you unlock it in what seems to be a Pentagon that has just sort of been captured by centralized planning. I mean, I think our great advantage against communist China is our ability to innovate. They're really good at copying. We're really good at innovating. But if we hamstring our ability to innovate, we lose our advantage, right? So this example of a learning period as it relates to commercial space, what would be a version in your mind that we could, sort of replicate in the NDAA?
Well, I think the commercial space is a great example where, SpaceX wasn't given the monopoly. They had to earn it. We had multiple competing approaches to get to space, and they thought that they could do that at a price performance level no one else could, and that's clearly been proven to be true. And I think if we applied that more generally, which is like the inductive bottoms-up innovation is the American spirit, that is our competitive advantage. How do we get more shots on goal for all of the efforts we're going to? Less certainty in the top-down centralized planning, more space to have new performers, new entrants present the heterodox ideas. I think for that to really take hold, you either need to have competitive program offices within the services, or you need to empower the COCOMs to create that sort of demand signal that varies, that pushes the adoption of innovation. If I look at our own company, the history, all of our adoption came from the field. It came from Iraq, it came from Afghanistan. It didn't come from the program offices. It actually came despite the program offices. They were resistant to this as something that was going to screw up their cost schedule performance. And so I think if the kiss of death would be trying to create some sort of smooth process to go from new ideas that are innovative to scaling them. I promise you that is always going to be hard, that is always going to be messy, it's going to be interpersonally frictionful. If we wrap that in process, we will kill it and smother it. But if we enable ourselves to lean into that friction, we will be able to field the cutting edge technologies we need.
So in addition, I want the other two to chime in too. So in addition to, in our meeting prior to this hearing, we talked a little bit about having the competition among services was an idea. Combatant commanders having some flexibility to adjust. So whether it's sort of a separate pot of money dedicated for that. We've talked about in this committee about having a separate pot for smaller players, the disruptors who might come into the marketplace. What other concrete ideas exist? And I guess, because I won't have time to ask the second question, but in the context of, if we were at war right now, like let's say we're at war with China tomorrow, like what would we do differently? Like what would we do differently that we're not doing now?
Yeah, just quickly, and happy to do a follow-up, but I think we leverage the full, I go back to this industrial network. We have tremendous commercial capacity we aren't tapping into and leveraging. We have to rebuild manufacturing, but not rebuild what we used to have, rebuild it with modern technology that's flexible. We have to think about, let's take contested logistics, leveraging electric vehicles, things that already exist, rather than trying to recreate this giant purpose-built force, become really fast adopters, integrators, and not try and be the inventors of everything. There's plenty of invention around. We need to be super fast at importing it, integrating it, and then getting it into the hands of our women and men in service.
I think there are models that exist. They have been practiced over the last few years, they were not scaled. I don't know that we have the structure to actually go scale those currently. We have done incredible work. The department should be commended on incredible work of these multiple pilot projects. Eventually, that must turn into, without becoming overly bureaucratic, right? This is the risk. Build on those successes of reaching out to thousands of companies, and speed is everything. How do you scale them in a relevant timeline? It's possible. It does require some flexibility. It requires transparency from the department. That's going to create the trust for speed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmitt. Mr. Sankar, I'm so glad Senator Schmitt asked that question. If we found ourselves at war immediately, go ahead and be the third response to that question.
I think we would lean in heavily into the primacy of people. Do you have the right person in charge of these programs? You'd stop rotating them immediately. You'd go deep on focus. You'd probably do a lot more with vertical integration of the capabilities, not reliant on thin horizontal supply chains. But I think we would organize around the most credible people and humans we have, and limit the number of programs we have, concentrate our arrows behind those things. And today we kind of have this bingo card approach to rotating our general officers around, making sure in the spirit of jointness that they have this array of experiences. I think that probably helps you in peacetime, but I think it strictly hurts you. You haven't even been in the role long enough to learn from the mistakes you've made. You don't even know they're mistakes yet. It takes a long time for these programs to get to the point where you're up the learning curve. I don't think you could just randomly replace Elon or Glenn Shotwell and expect these rockets to keep working. They have accumulated this knowledge over 20 plus years of building them.
Are we in peacetime now?
In my opinion, no. But I think we got to get the whole country to realize that.